Hello everyone, and welcome to the Chapter 17 video. You can see it's about blood. And the first thing we're going to talk about are some of the functions of blood. And if you lived in Vincennes, you'd understand this. Trains transport things, and blood transports things. Dissolved gases, nutrients, hormones, and waste all throughout your body. So transportation is maybe the main function of blood, and it has some other functions as well. This is a regulator. So blood regulates the pH and the ion composition of the blood. This is showing a blood clot. So blood has this protective feature that if we start bleeding, it will form a clot and prevent blood loss. So it's protective in that way. It's also part of the blood, which we'll talk about in a minute, is the white blood cells, which are involved in our immune system, and their job is defense against toxins and pathogens. And then we also have temperature regulation. So the blood is mostly water, and you all remember water has a very high heat capacity. So by sending blood different places, it can pick up heat, and it keeps our body temperature pretty stable. So those, and this is an example, you see this guy on the left here has no blood going to his face because he's cold. This guy, he's hot after exercising, so there's lots of blood going to his face, and that allows him to lose heat that way. So next, let's talk about the composition of blood. If you were to take blood and put it in a test tube like this and put it in a centrifuge and then you spin it, the heavy parts will go to the bottom, and the heavy parts would be the cells, or the formed elements. The cells, you can see red blood cells and white blood cells. And then the clear part would be the plasma. So let's look first at the plasma. You can see it's 92% water and about 7% proteins. And the important proteins in blood are the albumins, and their job is to attract water. This helps us to maintain blood pressure. They can also transport some things. The globulin proteins, they're involved in transporting things. Lipid-soluble things, such as lipid-soluble hormones, cannot travel in the blood very well by themselves, so they need a protein to transport them. And some of the globulins are antibodies, which are involved in the immune system. Another important protein is fibrinogen, which is involved in blood clotting. So the plasma, again, is mostly water, and blood is roughly 55% plasma, which is the water with these proteins. 1% other solutes, such as electrolytes like sodium and potassium, nutrients like glucose, and then wastes. Then the formed elements consist of the platelets, and platelets are involved in blood clotting, the white blood cells, which are involved in the immune system, and the red blood cells, and their main job is carrying oxygen. So let's look closer at a red blood cell. They're what's called a biconcave disc because they have two concave surfaces. And this is because in their development they eject their nucleus, so they're left with this unique shape, but this shape makes them great for diffusion. You can see everything in the cell is very close to the plasma membrane. They are very flexible, and they can form these stacks called rouleaux. Here's another one. That enables them to fit through narrow capillaries. Okay, these red blood cells, you can see, they don't have a nucleus or any other organelles, so they cannot repair themselves. They have a lifespan of approximately 120 days or 4 months, and during that time they're going to travel about 700 miles. They're not going to leave your body, but traveling around and around the blood vessels in your body, it's estimated they go about 700 miles just in that 4 months. So they're basically a plasma membrane full of hemoglobin. They're 95% hemoglobin. Here is hemoglobin. It's a protein that binds oxygen. It's made up of 4 polypeptide chains. You can see 2 alpha chains and 2 beta chains. And then there's this heme group. The heme group contains iron, and that's where oxygen binds. And it's estimated that a red blood cell has over 250 million molecules of hemoglobin, and each hemoglobin molecule can carry 4 oxygen atoms. So one red blood cell can carry over 1 billion oxygen molecules. It's quite amazing. And your body makes about 3 million new red blood cells every second. And then the broken down blood cells, after that 120 days, they start to die. They are engulfed by macrophages and they're recycled. And the globin part is broken down into amino acids, and those can be reused to make new proteins. The heme is converted into bilirubin. First, the iron from the heme, the iron is sent to the bone marrow to produce more hemoglobin. And then the heme part is converted into bilirubin, which is converted to urobilin and stercobilins. And that will be excreted in the feces and in the urine. So they don't last very long, but we take their parts and recycle them and reuse them to make new red blood cells. Erythropoiesis is the process of red blood cell formation. It happens in the bone marrow, in the red marrow. And it's stimulated by the hormone erythropoietin, or EPO for short. You might have heard of this with blood doping. And you can see in the formation, they start out as hemocytoblasts, which then become proerythroblasts. And basically the first thing they do is they make a whole bunch of ribosomes, and then those ribosomes make a whole bunch of hemoglobin, and then once it's pretty much full of hemoglobin, they eject the nucleus, and then they're left with that biconcave shape. So in the red bone marrow, proerythroblasts form erythroblasts. They first produce ribosomes, then hemoglobin, then the nucleus is ejected. And that's all you need to know about red blood cell formation. Next, we're going to talk about white blood cells. You can't actually see them until you put a stain on them, so they look purple or blue, but they're still called white blood cells. They are part of the body's defense system, and they use the blood to travel between organs or to the site of injury or infection. They can migrate out of the blood by a process called the diapedesis. So this would be the cells, this would be the inside of the blood vessel, and this would be like a muscle or whatever out here. And you don't need to know the details, but they come to the edge of the blood vessel, and there's a receptor that binds here, and they are able to squeeze in between the cells, making up the blood vessel. That's called diapedesis. And here's a picture of it happening in a capillary. And then you have what is called chemotaxis. Chemotaxis, they're attracted to chemicals that guide them to the site of an injury or an invader. So it's hard to tell, but these are bad guys down here, and this white blood cell is moving towards them. Okay, so a couple different types we need to know. neutrophils are phagocytes, and they also can release cytotoxic chemicals. Eosinophils, their main function is phagocytosis, along with the neutrophils. They also reduce inflammation. Basophils release histamine. They cause inflammation. In the monocytes, their main job is phagocytosis. Lymphocytes we'll talk about more in detail when we get to the immune system, but one of their main functions is producing antibodies. This chart shows how all the different blood cells are formed, and you don't need to know all of this. You just need to know they all start as a hemocytoblast. See a hemocytoblast right here? And then they're going to develop either into a lymphoid stem cell or a myeloid stem cell. And the lymphoid stem cells produce the lymphocytes, and they can go to other tissues such as the thymus. The myeloid stem cells are going to stay in the bone marrow and they're going to produce everything else. So monocytes, neutrophils, eosinophils, basophils, platelets, and erythrocytes. Alright, next thing we need to talk about is hemostasis, or the stoppage of bleeding. So there are a couple different phases. First we have what's called the vascular phase, or the vascular spasm. And when you injure a blood vessel, it constricts in response to that. That's the vascular spasm, and that way less blood is lost. Then we have the platelet phase, where the platelets stick to this damaged tissue. And the platelets form a plug, a platelet plug. And then we have blood clotting. Blood coagulation involves several proteins. You don't need to know them all. Know that, just know the last steps. You know calcium is involved. There's about 11, there's 12 different clotting factors. You just need to know the last steps here. So prothrombin is converted into thrombin. Then thrombin converts fibrinogen, which is soluble and is floating around in your blood. Thrombin converts fibrinogen into fibrin, which is insoluble and will form this solid clot. Then, once the fibrin network is formed, after several days, here's a blood clot. The quicker would be the fibrin, and red blood cells get caught in it, you can see. After a few days, you have what's called clot retraction, and the clot retracts, and if it's a stab on the outside of the body, it will fall off. And then the clot dissolves through a process called fibrinolysis. Next, we're going to talk about some blood disorders. There are some nutritional ones. If you don't have the right nutrients, you can't make blood cells. Iron deficiency anemia. There's someone with a normal amount of red blood cells. There's someone with anemia. You don't get enough iron in your diet, you don't have iron to make hemoglobin, and you can't make blood cells. With vitamin B12 deficiency, fewer red blood cells are produced. With a calcium and vitamin K deficiency, those can affect blood clotting. Then there are some congenital defects such as sickle cell anemia. And you have abnormal hemoglobin, and it causes the red blood cells, instead of having this nice biconcave disc shape, they have these weird shapes. And with those weird shapes, they don't travel through the blood as well. It causes lots of problems. Hemophilia. Somebody is lacking some of the proteins in that blood clotting pathway, they develop hemophilia, the blood doesn't clot. Here's one of those, thalassemia. thalassemia, and you have abnormal red blood cells, abnormal hemoglobin, which destroys the red blood cells. Septicemia is an infection of the blood, since the blood is everywhere, and that can spread everywhere as liquid. This is a mosquito spreading malaria, and that will deposit some parasites in your blood that will kill the red blood cells. And then leukemia is cancer of the white blood cells, so this person has way too many white blood cells. That's leukemia. So if you've got any questions from Chapter 17, please